breaking down a really rare and pretty wide-ranging interview with Vladimir Putin. This was actually his first ever interview on Indian television, and it gives us a direct look into how one of the world's longest-serving leaders sees things. So we're going to unpack exactly what he said.
To really get this conversation, you have to understand the context. Putin has been a major figure on the world stage for decades. Think about it. He's seen empires fall and new global powers rise up. So the real question is, how does he see the world today? And what does he want Russia's role to be?
We've boiled his worldview down into 5 key themes. We'll kick things off with the foundation of the whole talk, the India-Russia friendship. Then we'll look at how he sees that relationship as a way to push back against Western pressure. After that, we'll dive into his big vision for a new world order, his own justification for the war in Ukraine, and finally, we'll tie it all together into what you could call the Putin.
Let's start with the absolute core of the interview, the relationship between Russia and India. For Putin, this isn't just about strategy or politics. He frames it as something deeply personal, but also, of course, vitally strategic.
He used a pretty simple story to make a much bigger point. He was asked about that video that went viral of him and Prime Minister Modi sharing a golf cart. He basically just waved it off, saying it wasn't some planned photo op. He called it a spontaneous moment of human solidarity between friends who, he says, never run out of things to talk about.
His personal warmth is really built on a very practical, forward-looking partnership. He ran down this whole list of areas they're working on together, everything from space to AI, and he directly linked it to Modi's Make in India initiative. He really hammered this point home. It's not just Russia selling equipment, it's about sharing technology. And he described that as a very rare thing, a sign of incredibly deep.
This partnership in Putin's worldview, it serves 2 purposes. It's not just about mutual benefit. It's also a defense, a shield against what he kept calling Western pressure and arm-twisting methods.
Really direct in his praise for India's leadership. He basically presented the country as a major global power that knows its own mind, not a British colony, as he put it, and one that rightly refuses to be pushed around. He described Prime Minister Modi as having this unwavering and straightforward approach, totally focused on India's national interest.
This brings us to a really crucial concept that he kept bringing up: strategic autonomy. It's a bit of a jargony term, but the idea is simple. It's about a country charting its own course, making its own decisions, whether that's buying Russian oil or signing defense deals, based on its own interests, not what other countries are trying to pressure it.
How economy work in the real world? Well, Putin laid out a very clear 3-step playbook for getting around Western sanctions. Step 1, move trade away from the US dollar and use your own national currencies. Step 2, build your own financial messaging systems so you don't have to rely on Western ones. And step 3, make sure trade is a two-way street by actively buying more goods from your partners.
So let's zoom out now to Putin's bigger vision. He argues that all these individual partnerships are really just pieces of a much larger, and in his view, inevitable, global shift, the decline of the old Western-led order and the rise of what he calls a multipolar. This really stark contrast between the old centers of power and the new ones. On one side, you have the G7, which he kind of dismisses as having a shrinking share of the world economy. On the other side, you've got these rising groups like BRICS, which he describes as positive, forward-looking, and built on shared values.
At this point home, he offered a really simple comparison. He said if you measure economies by purchasing power parity, basically what a country's money can actually buy, India's economy is now the 3rd largest in the world. Meanwhile, a G7 member like the UK is 10th. For Putin, this isn't some prediction about the future. It's a reality today, one that he thinks the old structures just aren't.
What's the glue that holds these new alliances together? Well, according to Putin, it's not about being anti-West. He says it's about a shared foundation of traditional values that come from ancient civilizations. It's about working together to create something new, what he calls synergy, instead of just creating conflict.
Now we have to turn to the most controversial part of the whole interview, the war in Ukraine. We are going to lay out his justification for it exactly as he presented
in his own very specific timeline. In his telling, this whole thing didn't start in 2022. It started in 2014 with what he calls a Western-backed coup. He says that was followed by 8 years of Russia trying to find a peaceful solution with the Minsk agreements, which he now claims the West just used as a stalling tactic to arm Ukraine. So, from his point of view, Russia's invasion wasn't about starting a war, but about trying to end a war that the West had already ignited.
He was asked about the endgame. He defined it like this. It's about protecting Russian people, their language, their Orthodox religion, and what he calls their traditional values. And he's talking specifically about territories that he considers to be historically part of Russia's world. That is his stated goal.
He made a kind of legalistic argument against NATO expansion. He pointed specifically to Ukraine's own 1990 Declaration of State Sovereignty, and he argued that in that very document, Ukraine defines itself as a neutral state.
So he contends that any attempt to join a military alliance like NATO actually violates Ukraine's own founding principles.
Let's pull all these threads together. Let's synthesize this into the core ideas of what we can call the Putin doctrine, the fundamental principles that seem to be guiding his every move on the world.
Let's boil this doctrine down to 4 key beliefs. First, old clubs like the G7 are relics whose time has passed. Second, he sees the West as a power that uses coercion and arm twisting to keep its competitors down. Third, he believes a new world order, led by rising powers in the global South, is not just possible, but inevitable. And finally, he sees NATO's expansion as an unacceptable, direct threat to Russia's
Sense of just how intense the diplomacy is behind the scenes, Putin dropped one really striking detail. He said a recent meeting with U.S. representatives to talk about Ukraine lasted for 5 hours straight. 5 hours! He even admitted that he grew weary of it. It's a small number, but it says a lot about the incredible difficulty of the negotiations that are happening far away from any.
The most revealing moment of the entire interview was when he talked about the collapse of the Soviet Union. He called it the most shattering experience of his life. And what lesson did he learn from it? He said that's what happens when a country gets an idea of grandeur. It starts to make one mistake after another until it just falls apart. And then he finished with a very pointed observation. He sees that same pattern repeating itself in other countries.
That really leaves us with this central question that his whole worldview raises. This multipolar future that he describes, is it a path to a more balanced, more representative world, or is it really a blueprint for a world that's just more fractured, more divided into competing, distrustful blocks? The answer to that question is probably going to define the 21st century.